A very good afternoon to all the students of class 11. Well, today we're going to take up the lesson The Adventure by Jayant Narlikar. Now, as the title suggests, The Adventure. Now, adventure is something very challenging, something very exciting, and something that we really indulge in. But when we read the chapter and we get to know the contents of the chapter, we find that the adventure here is of a very different kind. Earlier, you've done the chapter, We Are Not Afraid to Die, We're Together. Now, in that also there was an adventure. So they set out on a sea voyage, and then they encountered those high waves and bad stormy weather, and they had a narrow escape with with death, and ultimately, of course, they were all safe and sound. Now, this adventure. Now, another synonym for adventure is an experience, an incident, an occurrence, something which is different from a normal and ordinary life, something that happens, an incident. So here also we will not consider this to be an adventure of that kind, but it is an event, an incident, an occurrence that took place in the life of Professor Gaitonde. Now, this is basically a science fiction, and actually science is integrated with all the subjects that we study. And here, like for example, you can say that how does science relate to languages? Well, of course, when you want to express something, when you want to communicate something, you have to have good communication skills. So in that form also, you have to make things clear, you have to make things interesting, and you have to present them in a very attractive way. So in that way, science and language definitely go hand in hand, whether you are expressing yourself orally or in a written form. So science does play an important role, okay? Now, this lesson is basically a science fiction, in English, which is a language, of course. Then science with maths also. So many scientific principles and rules, they are represented in the form of mathematical expressions like algebraic equations, geometrical formulas, graphs, etc. Everything involves science along with maths. Then astrology also, for example, if you take, it's a prediction which is done on a mathematical basis. Then science and history, of course. Then science is practical and history is theoretical, but they do correlate, Various scientific discoveries that took place in the earlier ages, and then we come to know about the situation of science at the time of the rule of various famous kings and rulers and various empires that existed. Science plays a very, very important role in our lives, so that is how science actually makes us function. Now, this basically, this lesson, it talks about, an alternative world, the present world. In the present world, like the protagonist, that is Gaitonde, he meets with an accident. Now, in that present scenario also, he knows about the present, but in the present again, he goes into an alternative world, okay? And he, basically, it's time traveling, okay? And he time travels and he goes into a different world where he experiences something that was not actually real. So we begin with the chapter now. So as I told you, it's a science fiction, it's a fantasy, and the writer has combined history, science, and philosophy in a unique way. Now, Professor Gaitonde, as we come to know in the content of the story, he's hit by a truck and he loses his consciousness for 2 days, he goes into a alternative world, a different world. Now, in that different world, Bombay, which today we say New Mumbai, it is still under the British rule, and the rest of India is independent. And in independent India, there is the Prime Minister called Peshwa, and he is staying in Pune. And the Mughal Emperor, who's now basically a titular head, doesn't have much powers in his hand, so it's just a kind of a signing authority, a titular head in name only, and who stays in Delhi. Now, in the real world, the actual world, the Marathas lost the Battle of Panipat, the third Battle of Panipat. As you know, there were 3 battles of Panipat that were fought. The first battle was fought in 1526 between Babur and Ibrahim Lodi, and Babur won the battle. Then in the second Battle of Panipat, we had the battle between Akbar and a Hindu king, Hemu. Then in 1761, the third battle was fought between the Marathas and Ahmad Shah Abdali, okay, from the Durrani kingdom. Okay, now actually in reality the Marathas had lost the battle, okay, but in this different world of the professor, the Marathas had won the battle of Panipat, and the Maratha Confederacy was, very, very strong, and as a result, they did not let the Britishers expand. So the Britishers were confined only to Bombay, which today is known as Mumbai. Now, there is another personality in the lesson who's a physicist, that is Professor Rajendra Deshpande. Now, when he meets Gaitonde after he's visited the alternative world, he tries to explain to Professor Gaitonde the experience on the basis of theories of catastrophe and lack of determinism in quantum theory. He tells Gaitonde that he traveled neither to the past nor to the future, and that he was very much in the present, but only experiencing the kind of world that he wished to see. And he says his history was the history as it ought to have taken place in Gaitonde's view. Because at the time of the accident, at the time of the collision, the professor was thinking about the catastrophe theory and also about the Battle of Panipat, and that is how both got linked together. And that is why he went into an alternative world, a world of his own, which he imagined, to be there, because he wanted to see it like that. So now we take on the chapter point-wise. So the chapter opens by Gaitonde. He finds himself in a train which is going to Bombay. Then there is one Khan Sahib, and he tells Gaitonde that the British Raj had begun from the station called Sarhad. Then the proof that Gaitonde actually gives in his imagination, when he expresses himself, communicates that an Anglo-Indian in uniform is seen checking permits in the train. Then Gaitonde, that is also Gangadhar Pant, Gaitonde, he was surprised to find Bombay under the British rule. And he sees East India Company's office when he, alights from the train, when he comes down from the train, and he sees this huge office of the East India Company, and he sees various stores and various shops pertaining to the British, colonial rule. Then there is another aspect that, he goes from there, and then he wants to visit his son, whom he thinks is there, Mr. Vinay Gaitonde, at his office in the Forbes, okay? And, but he is unable to trace him. And the lady who's at the reception tries her level best to, find out more about him, but is unsuccessful. After that, he goes to the Asiatic Society, the library, to check the historical facts, where he asks for the 5 volumes of the of these history books and books that he had himself authored also. Now there is new history versus actual history. Now the new history part is that Professor reads startling facts even in his own book. He finds history up to Aurangzeb's death the same, but it takes a different turn thereafter. And what he sees is that the Maratha had won the third battle of Panipat, and they had defeated Ahmad Shah Abdali and they had chased him away. And as a result, the Marathas gathered a lot of power, and the influence of the East India Company got restricted to pockets or small areas like Bombay, Madras and Calcutta. Calcutta today we say Kolkata, and Madras today we say Chennai. Now the Marathas, for their own convenience and political reasons, they retained the puppet Mughal regime, or the Mughal emperor who was there in Delhi for political reasons. Then the Marathas, they set up centers for science and technology, and these Peshwas, they gradually were replaced soon after by representatives in a democratic India. Okay, so that new phase is also there. Then he also, during that course, sees that Bombay was a British business outpost, and it was on lease up to 2001. So the professor wants to know how the Marathas had won the third battle of Panipat. And then from the books itself, he finds out that, a bullet had been, had brushed past Vishwas Rao, and he had escaped narrowly, and he was saved. Now that was the new history. But the actual history was that the Marathas had lost the third battle of Panipat. Vishwas Rao was killed, and his uncle Bhau Sahib had disappeared forever, and he was not seen after that. And the Maratha army had been led by these two. Then as a result, what happened, when the Maratha army saw that their leaders are missing, like one had been killed and one disappeared, so they went helter-skelter, and they lost all hope of winning the battle, and they, almost gave in. And then the British came to rule over the whole of India. And the Mughal king, or the emperor, he became a puppet king in the hands of the Britishers. So then, now this Professor Gaitonde actually was very fond of addressing public meetings, So in the course of the event, after he comes out from the library, and there, when he's browsing through the books and trying to gather details on of these historical events that have taken place, the librarian comes and says the time is up and he must leave, and he could come the next morning. So as he got up to leave, he tucked in a few notes in his pocket, and he also absent-mindedly he put the Bhau Sahib Banshi Bakar also in his pocket. Now what is a Bakar? I would just like to tell you for information. Bakar is a form of historical narrative written in Marathi prose, and they are one of the earlier genres of medieval Marathi literature, and one of them is extensively written on Shivaji and his achievements. Okay, so that was Bakar. Then he goes to a guest house, and there he has a small meal, and then he goes out for a stroll towards the Azad Mandi. Now when he goes to the Azad Mandi, there he finds that a meeting is going on, but there is a vacant chair on the stage, which is the chair of the president. And as he's very fond of speaking at these public meetings, he goes and sits in that chair, and he begins to deliver his lecture. But the people are not in the mood to listen to him, and they kind of insult him by not listening to him, and they hurl tomatoes and eggs at him, and they just don't want to listen to him, and he's ejected out of the meeting bodily by some people. And after that, as he's walking, and then there's a collision with the truck, and he becomes unconscious. Now at that point of time, in his unconsciousness, his mind traveled back in time. And before the accident, this professor was preparing to give a lecture on what course history would have taken if the result of the Battle of Panipat had gone the other way. Gone the other way means if the battle had been won by the Marathas, what would have been the course of history? So he was thinking about that at that time. And this is what made his mind, think about the Battle of the Panipat. And this is how he foresees all that, and that the Maratha influence was there. They had won the war, and the East India Company had been, confined to a limited area. So after those 2 days, when he regains consciousness, and then he comes and meets this Professor Rajendra Deshpande, who's a physicist friend, and he then explains his experience by using the catastrophe theory and the lack of determinism in quantum theory, which make us see reality from a different viewpoint. Okay. Then Professor Gaitonde asked his friend why he made the transition, the change from this world to the alternative world. Then Professor Rajendra Deshpande said that he might be thinking of the catastrophe theory at the time of the collision, and also thinking about the Battle of Panipat, and that is how it got connected, and that is how all that happened. Now, when he brings out proof of those notes from his pocket, Professor Deshpande is a little startled, but at that time, he says that he cannot give an answer to all his questions, because sometimes there are so many questions in science that remain unanswered. But then thinking and adding everything together slowly, that is the result that he came to was that at the time of the collision, he was thinking about the Battle of Panipat, and he was thinking about the catastrophe theory, and that is how he went into this alternative world. Now here we come to see that basically what is the catastrophe theory in the adventure and otherwise. Okay, so the catastrophe theory, it states that a small change in circumstances can bring sudden shift in behavior. Sudden shift in behavior, there's a slightest change in circumstances and it can bring about a change in behavior. So if this theory is applied to the Battle of Panipat, then we can find that there was a crucial moment when the Marathas lost both their leaders, Vishwasrao and Bhau Sahib. Okay, so as a result, the army went helter-skelter, and there was utter confusion and chaos. And so there was a shift in behavior with this sudden change. And what was the change? That both the leaders were not there. One had been killed and the other just disappeared. So as a result, with this little change in circumstances, there was a shift in the behavioral pattern also. Now this catastrophe theory, it was originated by the French mathematician René Thom in the 1960s. And catastrophe theory is a special branch of dynamical systems theory. It studied and classifies phenomena characterized by sudden shifts in behavior arising from small changes in circumstances. Now, I'll give you a few examples change in circumstance and how behavior can change. Now, catastrophe theory has been applied to a number of different phenomena. For example, you take the stability of ships at sea. They are sailing smoothly, and then you come to know that, they've capsized, suddenly. Then the bridge is there, a strong structure, but suddenly the bridge collapses. Then, small things. Now there is a cricket team, and suddenly you are expecting them to put up a big score, on the scoreboard, but suddenly you see that one after the other the wickets fall at a very fast rate, and then the event, and then what happens after that, what is the result. So there is a shift in behavioral patterns, okay? And even in, not only in human beings also, not only in objects also, even in animals also, if there is a sudden change in circumstances, how their behavior pattern also changes. Suddenly, you see a group of people, and suddenly, a crowd, you can see a crowd turning into a mob. So that's a transition, a change, in behavioral pattern. So now this Professor Gaitonde, he was hit by a truck, when he was going for, when he was coming back from this Anaj Mandi. And at last, when he came out from there, when he was thrown out by the people, he lost consciousness, but his mind was working and it was moving from place to place. Okay, so he was unconscious, but his mind was working and it was moving from place to place. Now, if we look at the reality side of Gaitonde, he was an eminent historian from Pune, India. He was a known author of, tons of books on history, and had presided over 998 meetings, seminars, debates, jubilees, and other functions. And then he was waiting for, his 1000th function, which was going to be a seminar devoted to the third battle of Panipat. Now, the incidents in the story happened between the 998th and 1000th. That is on the occasion of the 999th public function, on which he was to preside over a seminar on catastrophe theory in the mathematics department, Pune University. And they knew that Professor Gaitonde would readily accept the invitation. So to get a good deal of information about this catastrophe theory, Professor Gaitonde approached a research fellow, Dr. Rajendra Deshpande. They debated and discussed. And finally, Professor Gaitonde understood that a little deviation in any course of an act or task can cause unexpected effects. Okay. Dr. Rajendra Deshpande, then I'm giving you a few more examples, I've just told you how a cricket side collapses all of a sudden, because why it's a sudden thing, because everyone is expecting that the team will really stand on solid ground and put forth a good result. But no, it's unexpected. Then suddenly share prices crash, suddenly. Then suddenly there's an unexpected turn of events in a battle. So all these things. Now, Professor Gaitonde got really interested because it wasn't just mathematics, it was history also being discussed. And it was his hobby to speculate, to reason out, to guess, the course of events, some battles if they had ended differently. Okay, and they've given another example of the Battle of Waterloo. If the battle had not been lost, what would have been the course of events? Napoleon. Okay. Now he was thinking about the 1000th one. While he was walking back home, Professor Gaitonde's mind was occupied by the thought of the third battle of Panipat, and he linked it with the catastrophe theory. And what course, would have history taken if the battle had been won. Then another thing that they're talking about here is the quantum theory. Okay, the quantum theory is a theoretical basis of modern physics that explains the nature and behavior of matter and energy on the atomic and subatomic level. The behavior of matter and energy at that level is sometimes referred as quantum physics and quantum mechanics. Okay, we are not going to go into detail of the physics part, okay? But we can say that quantum is the minimum amount of any physical property involved in an interaction, okay? Quantum particles can behave like particles located in a single space, or they can act like waves distributed all over space or in several places. Like in the book they have given about electrons, you know, that when they are charged and when on radiation, from a higher energy they can move to a lower energy, or from low energy they can move to a higher energy. Like they have talked about macrocosm and microcosm on a larger scale and also on a lower scale, okay? So the quantum theory basically it says that it is not decisive. You cannot vouch for anything. Like if somebody is shooting a bullet, okay, somebody fires, okay, and you know that the bullet is going to go and hit that particular thing or object or area, okay, but for all these particles and these electrons and all, you cannot say, because they are all, they can, in, you know, like there are different worlds, different areas. So in one world the electron is here, in another world the electron can be somewhere else. So as a result they can be all over. So in that context they're talking about reality. They're talking about reality. That reality is not absolute, okay? Reality is not absolute. What can be reality for you may not be reality for me, okay? It may not be reality for somebody else. So they're talking about reality also, that reality is not absolute, okay? Okay, so I think that is what basically the whole chapter is and how they've linked it, you know. So, and it'll become clearer when we move on to the question and answers. So, reality was that the Marathas had lost the battle, okay? But in the alternative world, Gaitonde feels that the Marathas had won the battle, you know. And that is why when he's traveling in that train in that alternative world, when he gets down, he's surprised to see so much of, you know, the British India office, the East India office, and the British India, all those shops and, you know, those things that are related to the Britishers, because he was not aware of the fact, you know. He thought that after the revolt of 1857, everything was finished and the Britishers had gone back and, you know, India was independent. But it wasn't like that, okay? But because everything was connected with the Third Battle of Panipat, he's limited to that period of history. Thus, we can conclude that the seminar he went to in the Azad Maidan was his last seminar and also his 1000th seminar, which he experienced in the alternative world when he was in the unconscious state. How the torn pages of the book travel to the real world is of course a mystery, and this also states that truth is relative. There is no commonly accepted truth. Your truth and my truth are different. Just as electrons movement is unpredictable, electrons or neurons movement is unpredictable, truth is also unpredictable. So when he met with this collision, he was thinking about the catastrophe theory and its role in wars, precisely maybe the Battle of Panipat. So this triggered this unusual occurrence, and as I said, perhaps the neurons in his brain acted as a trigger. So this is the summing up of this fantasy or the science fiction that the writer wants to convey in this lesson. Because we can say that this was his 1000th seminar, because the Panipat seminar that he was supposed to attend later on he cancelled out and he sent his letter of regret saying that he would not be able to participate in that seminar. So this, we can say, was his 1000th seminar, the one that he experienced at the Azad Maidan. This is what the chapter is all about. So I'll move on to the question and answers and see, I'm sure things will get clearer. You neither traveled to the past nor to the future. You were in the present, experiencing a different world, an alternative world. Explain. According to Rajendra Deshpande, Professor Gaitonde, Gangadhar Pant Gaitonde, experienced a different reality in a different world, but in the present times. It's not that he went to the past or he's in the future. It was in the present itself. So there were two worlds for him. One world when he was actually alive, and second world that he went to was when he became unconscious, but both at the same time in the present times. Okay, he had undergone the experience of two different worlds, one at a time. So they did not happen simultaneously. First it was the real world, then the world when he became unconscious. So one at a time he experienced them. After the collision, he saw that he wanted to see about the Indian history in the real world of the present, not of the past. Second question. You have passed through a fantastic experience, or more correctly, a catastrophic experience. Explain. Professor Rajendra Deshpande, he viewed Professor Gaitonde's experience as catastrophic because it was really unusual. I'm sure you've all heard the word catastrophe, something disastrous, dangerous, something that happens, a catastrophe, okay? He saw the victory, why it was unusual? Because he saw the victory of the Marathas just as most Indians would have liked to see. And his experience at the Azad Maidan, where he was hooted and mishandled by the public, was really catastrophic. Okay. Gangadhar Pant could not help comparing the country he knew with what he was witnessing around him. Explain. Now, Gangadhar Pant was surprised to see Bombay still under the British rule, and to read that the Marathas had won the Battle of Panipat. He could not reconcile, he could not accept what he saw with what he knew. So he consulted history books in a library, and thus he could not help comparing the actual past with what he was seeing. So reality versus, his alternative world. One part of his mind instinctively told him that what he was seeing could not be real. Explain the statement that there is the lack of determinism in quantum theory. Lack of determinism, that you cannot be determined, you cannot be sure of what you are predicting, of what you are saying, or be sure of your findings. Okay. Rajendra Deshpande refers to the lack of determination in quantum theory experiments which are done on atoms and their constituent particles, that is electrons and protons and neutrons, for instance. They show that reality may not be unique. The behavior of atomic particles cannot be predicted definitely. Because as I told you, if a bullet is fired, we can determine where it will be at a later time, what it will go and hit, okay? But an electron fired from a source may be found anywhere. It can be orbiting, moving in any of a large number of specified states. Moreover, it can jump from a higher energy level to a lower energy level and vice versa. Such transitions, such changes are common in what we call microscopic systems. Minute, microscopic, something that is minute. And so you can imagine what happens on a, on a microcosm level, what will happen at a macrocosm level, on a larger scale. Next question. You need some interaction to cause a transition. Discuss the statement. Okay. Transition, a change from one world to the other world. So far as reality is concerned, all alternatives are viable. There can be different variations, there can be different alternatives. However, the observer can experience only one of them at a time. Gaitonde made a transition, a change from one world to another and back again. Two situations which were totally different. Gaitonde underwent the experience of two worlds, one at a time. The transition from one world to the other needs some trigger, something to start it, to trigger it off, to start it. In Gaitonde's case, it seems that his thoughts about the catastrophe theory and its role in wars, and in particular as he was thinking of the Battle of Panipat, at the time of being hit by the truck, caused the transition, caused that change. Of course, the precise cause of transition would remain a mystery. Basically, exactly you can't say, but that is, one theory that has been given, that for his transition. Okay, next question. In what sense is the story a fantasy? Now, the experience of Professor Gaitonde is far removed from reality, far-fetched. It's not, reality, as I told you. It's fantasy, it's science fiction. After his accident, he moves from one world to the other, from one time to another time. In fact, whatever he sees or experiences is what he always wanted to see or experience. The incidents related by him thus belong really to the world of fantasy. Next question. What surprised Professor Gaitonde? Now, Professor Gaitonde, as he was moving in a train which was going to Bombay, he's surprised when Khan Sahib tells him that the British Raj had begun from the station called Sarhad. Then there's an Anglo-Indian in uniform who's checking the permits in the train. Then in Bombay, Gaitonde sees the offices of East India Company, then British companies and stores. And strangely, another thing that happens is that he does not find his son's office when he visits the Forbes building. Next question. Describe Professor Gaitonde's conversation with Khan Sahib. Now, Khan Sahib told Professor Gaitonde that he was going to Peshawar. Now, he asked Professor Gaitonde's destination. Then he started talking about his business. In this way, Professor Gaitonde got a flavor of life in India and how he would reach Peshawar. Next question. Why was Gangadhar shocked when he came out of the train? Gangadhar came out of the train and at the railway station, and he was shocked to see a very big building on which it was written that it was headquarters of the East India Company. But he remembered that the company had already left India after the events of 1857. That is the revolt, the mutiny revolt of 1857. Next question. What did Professor Gaitonde do at the Forbes office? Now, Professor Gaitonde went to the Forbes office and he told the English receptionist that he wanted to meet Mr. Vinay Gaitonde, his son. And she searched through the telephone list and the staff list and the directory of employees, and also of all the other branches, of the Forbes company. But she could not find any employee of that name. Why? Next question. Why did Gaitonde go to the town hall? What did he do there? Professor Gaitonde went to the library of the Asiatic Society in the town hall to solve the riddle of history. He got many books on history, including his own. He studied the books keenly to find the solution to his problem. Okay. Next question. The change evidently had occurred in the last volume. How? Now, Professor Gaitonde studied all the 5 volumes of the book, but in the last volume, history had taken a different turn. It was that the Marathas had won the Battle of Panipat handsomely, and Abdali had been routed by Vishwas Rao, and he had been chased away, and the Marathas had established themselves as a strong power. Next question. What was the result of the Maratha victory over Abdali? The victory was a great morale booster to the Marathas. Moreover, it also established the Maratha supremacy in northern India. And the East India Company had to temporarily shelve its expansionist program. They could not expand and spread themselves, and they had to limit themselves to certain areas of Bombay, then Calcutta and Madras. Next question. What were the changes seen in the 20th century? In the 20th century, changes were inspired by the West. India became a democratic country. Then the Peshwas were replaced by democratically elected bodies. And the Shahenshah of Delhi became the nominal head only, titular head only. Next question. Why did Gangadhar begin to appreciate the India he had seen? Now, Gangadhar began to appreciate the India he had seen because it was independent, not a slave of the whites, of the Britishers. India was self-reliant and powerful, and it had allowed the British to hold Bombay as the sole outpost purely for commercial reasons, for trade purposes. Next question. Why were Gangadhar's investigations incomplete? Gangadhar felt that his investigations were incomplete. He wanted to know the reasons how the Marathas had won the battle. For the answer to his queries, he searched the books and the journals, giving an account of the battle itself. Next question. What attracted Gangadhar's attention to the Azad Maidan? Gangadhar saw a pandal at the Azad Maidan, and the lecture was in progress. He was mesmerized by the platform where the main chair was unoccupied. The unoccupied presidential chair attracted his attention, and he was very fond of speaking at these public meetings. So that was a big attraction for him. Next question. How was Gangadhar treated when he occupied the presidential chair? Gangadhar occupied the presidential chair, but the audience reacted sharply. The people asked him to vacate the chair immediately. He tried to convince them, but became the target of tomatoes and eggs and other objects. And ultimately, he was ejected out of it physically. So he was really handled in a very improper manner. What was Gangadhar's vital piece of evidence? Vital, important. Gangadhar had inadvertently, he had slipped the bhakkar in his pocket when he left the library. He was left with only a torn off page of the book which contained the vital evidence that described how Vishwas Rao narrowly missed the bullet. Okay. Bhakkar, I told you, Marathi literature, the earliest genre. Okay. Next question. How was catastrophic theory applied to the Battle of Panipat? Now, Rajendra justified the application of the catastrophic theory by saying that the Maratha army was facing Abdali's troops. Both the armies were equally strong, but the turning point came when the bullet missed Vishwas Rao, which made all the difference. So a sudden, change in circumstances. So if the bullet had hit Vishwas Rao, he would have been killed and the result would have been something else. But because he was saved, the armies, they were filled with the renewed vigor and energy and bravery and all that, and they were able to defeat Abdali. So, that is catastrophic theory, how a little change in circumstances, brings about a shift in the behavior pattern. So this is how the catastrophe theory was applied. Next question. What is Rajendra Deshpande's view of reality? Very important. Now, Rajendra Deshpande opines, or he states, that reality is not limited to what we see. It has other manifestations, many other forms. We experience it directly without our senses, or indirectly via instruments, through objects. The idea of "it might have been" is good for the sake of speculation, to guess, but not for reality. Okay, so as it is said that reality is not absolute, because what I said as reality for you may be different, and reality for me may be something different. So similarly, reality is not absolute. It is not limited to what we see. You see somebody doing a very good task and you feel that the person is a good Samaritan, a very good person. Now that is the reality you presume, but you don't know the other side of the person, okay? So reality, people today do a lot of charity and all these kind of things, and to get into the limelight and suddenly become heroes, but that is not reality. If you go and look at the other side of their personalities, another side of their behavioral patterns, maybe you experience something totally different, a total contrast. So reality cannot be limited to only what you see. Okay. What did Professor Gaitonde read about the Battle of Panipat, and with what consequences? Now, Professor Gaitonde read about the Battle of Panipat in the Town Hall Library in the book Bhau Sahib Banshi Bakhar, and he came to know from the book how Vishwas Rao narrowly escaped a bullet, and the incident turned the tide in favor of the Marathas, and Abdali was routed, defeated, and he was chased back to his kingdom. Now, the consequences of the battle were that it established the supremacy of the Marathas in northern India, and the East India Company had to shelve its expansion ideas, and the company was reduced to pockets of influence near Bombay, Calcutta and Madras only. And as far as the Peshwas were concerned, the influence of Bhau Sahib and Vishwas Rao increased significantly. Now this was according to the third battle of Panipat being won, which was not true. This was in the alternative world as Gaitonde had seen it. Okay. You neither travel to the past nor the future. You were in the present experiencing a different world. This I've already done with you, but just to make it clear that he had not been transported. He had not been shifted from one world to another world. He was only experiencing a different reality in a different world, but in the present itself. And he explained his point in detail. He said that when a bullet is fired, we can determine where it will go and hit. We can actually, predict it, determine it. But in the case of an electron, we cannot determine its destination. In one world, the electron may be found at one place, and in the other at a different place. Okay, the electron is said that it can orbit, move in any of a large number of states. It can make a jump from one level to the other. And this is what happened to Gaitonde. After the collision, he had been in an alternative universe by making a transition. In fact, he had undergone the experience of two different worlds, but one at a time. Because it was real world, and then alternative world, and then back to the real world. Okay? Next, last question. Gangadhar could not help comparing the country he knew with what he was witnessing around him. Discuss the statement. In the new world, different from the actual, Gangadhar Pant saw that Bombay was still under the British. He was surprised. When he went to a library, he was greatly surprised to read in the historical account something different from what he knew about the actual world. And the Marathas, he learnt, had won the Battle of Panipat, and he had established the rule in northern India. And according to that story, the British did not rule over the whole of India. The influence of the East India Company was limited only to areas near Bombay, Calcutta and Madras. And the Peshwas kept the Mughal titular head of the state, for their own political gains. The East India Company offered aid or help and experts which were accepted to develop the local centers. And why Gangadhar was happy to see all that was because India had not been subjected to slavery in that world. When he saw that India was not subjected to slavery, and that India was slavery to the Britishers, and India was flourishing under the Maratha rule. And only Bombay was allowed to remain with the British on lease till it expired in 2001. So, I think I have tried to cover every aspect of it and tried to make it easy. So, thank you very much, children. Please do like and share if you find it, of use to you all. I want each and every child to benefit in some way or the other, and this is my little attempt to reach out to you all. Thank you so much for listening, watching. God bless you all.